Hey guys, Thomas the Genie here, aka Mustache Tom, here to review the movie The Hate You Give, or the acronym THUG, if you read it down. Pretty clever title there. So, this movie starts in this little house and follows this family of a father, a daughter, a mother, and I believe the daughter has a brother, and I think she has one other relative or someone that just lives with them, I think. I'm not sure about that specific detail, but nonetheless, we mainly are going to be following this female character whose name is Star. And we see that the father is a follower of the Black Panthers, not the movie, but obviously, but the actual group. And he gives them all these studying exam papers, and says that he will teach them all about where they come from and, you know, being pulled over by the police and how to handle that situation, what to do, so on and so forth, going into each detail into making sure that, if they ever get pulled over, to follow all instructions, because it's going to happen, that being them being pulled over, and so on and so forth. So, it cuts to some time ahead where she's a bit older and she starts to talk about, via narration, about her parents and living in this area called Garden Heights, as well as a reoccurring problem later in the movie, a thug lord, I guess I'll call him that, named King, or Jug Lord, or some sort of lord, anyway. Uh, So, she attends a high school far from her little district area called William High School. And when she's around these other students, mainly prominently white characters, obviously, she goes around doing her best not to use any slang, although it does slip from time to time later in the movie at the very least. And she has a friend named Haley, who has some stuff later on, and a boyfriend as well. I assume that the boyfriend is some sort of popular kind of figure in the school. Nonetheless, they kiss, and he starts to make a fool of himself, doing some weird dance or whatever. And after their little hangout, it cuts to Star going to a party back in her area, and she's describing how neither version of her, the one that she pretends to be or the one she really is, none of them really like to go to this little dance. And she meets her little, I guess I'll call it a friendly rival called, her name is Kenya, and she starts to start some drama, uh, upon seeing some other girl and some guy dating, and I guess she was, associated with the girl at the very moment. So, Star starts to talk to a boy, relative to her age, named Khalil, and the two of them start to hang out. And after a little fight breaks out, they hear gunshots and everyone starts to flee from the vicinity. And as they get into the car, Khalil starts to talk about a famous rapper once known as Tupac. And she starts to talk about afterwards how when they were kids, they talked about dressing up as Harry Potter characters and which one they were, and so on and so forth. So she's romanced by this character now, and they kiss in the car. But she does admit to having a boyfriend. However, after they start driving again, they get stopped by a cop car, as indicated by the beginning. So the cop, sorry, pulls Khalil out of the car, and he's not following instructions, or he's like hesitating at the very moment, and he proceeds to when the cop tells him when he's outside to like stay where he is, he starts to talk to Star anyways and reaches in to grab a comb, and the cop proceeds to shoot him. And from the cop's perspective, he assumed he was grabbing for a gun. And of course, from Star's perspective, she saw the comb that he was grabbing for, and thus a really bad situation ensues. And I must say, at this point, there is some really solid acting from the actress that plays Star, and in fact, I would argue that all the performances are really, really solid. But that particular moment when she's just crying over her friend, definitely, or I guess almost boyfriend, but she already had that other one, so whatever. Anyways, she proceeds to go to the detective office, and she's trying to explain what happened, still under, that great deal of stress, or, just being petrified. And her uncle, who is an officer, pulls her out, as she's starting to get a little angry at all the questions being directed to what Khalil did and not what actually happened. So afterwards, the family visits the funeral, and we learn that Khalil was selling drugs for the drug lord King, and it was for like his family or something, so that he can help them out, or so, I think it was like something like that. So the uncle arrives, and they all continue on, and some of the cops are getting a little bit up on each other, and it cuts to Star back at her school, and as I mentioned, her beginning narration was about how she'd never tries to use slang, but during this basketball court, while she was playing with her friend, she did use, I think, one slang term. I forgot which one it was specifically, but I just wrote down that she did, like, kind of go back or go to that area where she said she would never talk about or say things like that. So, Star talks with Kenya about, or Kenya talks to her about stepping up and talking about what happened. And King, the actual drug lord himself, arrives and decides to give them a little ride. He tells her specifically to keep pushing and to just keep moving on. And as we cut back to the mother and the father arguing or talking, generally talking, she talks about how the area in which you live does not define who you are. As she's arguing with Maverick, the father, a little bit here. So, Maverick, the father, talks to Star about some little things like Harry Potter and how that's about being in a gang, and that's what he assumes it's about. And it's a little cute scene of them bonding after all that drama and tension. So, he talks about how the world of drugs is essentially a trap, so that people who are in the lower end of the income spectrum are forced to sell drugs only to get placed in the get arrested. it was pretty interesting to hear that perspective. So after that, there are like people trying to speak up on the news, and the mother says that they being the white police officers specifically, I assume, or just maybe in general, see blackness, as they refer to it, as a weapon. And we see that a protest is starting to get out of control on the news, and it's starting to slowly but surely turn into riots. So, the protest is pretty interesting. It does, even for a movie that's not a horror movie, it definitely did had some unsettling tension, is what I'll refer to it as. So, one of the people who initially led the protest, this lawyer lady, speaks with Star about using her voice and talking to her about, speaking up about what happened to Khalil. So, as the lawyer is about to head out, she starts to talk about how this has actually happened before, how she had seen someone else get shot, and how she never spoke out about it because the person eventually either got killed or something along those lines. But I think it was assumed that it was one of King's several men, or you know. So, she goes back to the school, and they are starting to protest, and they have their little posters, which I don't know what the timeline is anymore. I assume, like, the Black Panther thing was, like, during, during when that was active, and then we cut to, I assume, like, she must be like 18, so like close to that many years, because now there are Black Lives Matter posters, and that the Black Lives Matter movement, is something that was more current. So a bit of a timeline, interesting skip there. Nonetheless, so she's getting angry that they're protesting, and again, protesting for the wrong reasons, so she dips out of school as well. And she talks to her mom about either wanting to speak up for Khalil or not. She's trying to figure out what she wants to do at this point. And she's starting to see King outside just watching her. And this is a reoccurring theme as the movie presses on. So, during this little get-together of the family, everyone's recording the police as, like, the family's, like, pulled outside. I believe the father was initially pulled outside first, or he saw, like, King, and he was getting ready to do something, and then that's when the police kicked in, and then the abuse, and then everyone was recording, so they backed off. So, Maverick, once again, reassuring that that message of the movie is telling Star to use the gift of her voice. So she goes back to eventually talking to her two other friends, Haley and that one other friend that she has. And during this little chat, Haley takes up the side of the cop and brings up the whole, I don't know if she specifically said Blue Lives Matter, or, like, essentially she just said that cop's life mattered too. And she starts to question her friend's judgment and assumes that Haley, or she asks a question and then Haley says she assumes that it's the racist thing, and then Star cannot believe that that was what became of the association, that it was ended up being a racist thing. So she leaves her friend and she goes back to her mom and dad about moving on. Uh, and her boyfriend figures out, I forgot where this was in my notes, but at one point she does like go to the news outlet and like speak on what happened, and she says essentially everything, and they blanked her out. So the boyfriend does eventually figure this out. And in a case of, again, using that same current movement of like Black Lives Matter, we have her also mentioning white privilege. And she says, and I put this in quotes, you don't see me, you don't see my, if you don't see my blackness, you don't see me, meaning that, you know, it's a very, that is a very interesting aspect. You know, do you let the color of your skin define you? You know, of what, like, what, you know, versus, like, heritage and, like, culture, and, like, all these things are, like, coming up in this movie. So it is a very interesting asset to see. And so the boyfriend, after the little conversation, says he definitely wants to meet the father, and then he gets immediately kicked out. Or when he does, asking about this boyfriend. I guess his name was Chris. I wrote that in my notes. Didn't get his name before. At least I don't recall getting his name before. So, as they are talking, their house gets shot at, the family, and it was someone from the King's group wanting the daughter's silence, essentially, since she already had spoken out about the king being this sort of kingpin around the area. So Maverick goes with, again, I mentioned how they had another kid with them. I don't know, I forgot what their situation was, but his name is Seven. So they go after King, and meanwhile, Star goes to her uncle, and he explains what he would do as a cop, specifically if he was given the exact same situation that cop was in, the one that shot Khalil. However, Star redirects him into a hypothetical situation of if it had been a rich man in a rich car, specifically a rich white man, and in that situation he kind of just audibly says that he would ask the question first and then do something about it later. And she obviously gets upset about this, obviously revealing the bias between if it had been a rich white man or another black person. So she starts to narrate about Khalil afterwards. And then it cuts to her back at school, and Haley and her get at it again, arguing about, you know, who was in the right, who was in the wrong. Obviously, Star with the more potent points to make here with Haley. And this time, Haley just happened to have a comb with her, so Star proceeds to grab said comb and point it at her, yelling at her as if it to be a gun, and everyone else within the vicinity is seeing this, and She freaks Haley out to the point of crying and then leaves. So her boyfriend stops her, and then she starts to freak out in his car, and he's like giving her support. So we learn that Seven, her brother, again, there's like something about his family. Again, I guess he just stays with them. I wasn't like ever so sure about that. Anyways, he gets like beat up, and they rush over before King arrives, and they get him out of there. And as they are leaving, they drive right into this rally that is happening, this march. And they say that even after the her Star saying all the information, they say that the cop went free. So Star says she wants to stay with this protest and wants the boyfriend, to take Seven, and I believe Kenya was with them, and one other person, I forget who, but they end up getting led to safety. So Star starts to follow this rally towards this police brigade that is placed on the other side, and they chant another of one of those terms, hands up, don't shoot, which is something I've seen happen in those riots before. And Star starts to narrate how a microphone is just as much of a powerful weapon as a gun, which is probably one of this movie's more poignant messages about, using your voice instead of automatically going for that weapon. However, in that initial attempt, the first attempt with her using a microphone, it does not work. The police start to do their thing. They start to push back. They start to throw their little smoke grenades or whatever. So everyone's like fleeing, and then we see that like Seven and King end up like reuniting and ended up in their father's store, and King, who had been watching them once again at a distance, has one of his men throw a cocktail inside the store with the two inside the store. So, we see these two old men arrive and try to help out from the outside, as well as Maverick and the rest of the family. Like, everyone's reuniting. They manage to get them out, but the cops also arrive, with King also there, and King's ready to do something, Maverick's ready to do something, Star's ready to do something. However, it is among their family. I mentioned very, very briefly that Star had an actual brother, and their brother is a smaller kid. I believe his name meant Joy, but I forgot what his I forgot what the actual alternative name was for that. So he is the one with the handgun up, and the cops are aiming at the kid. And she starts to narrate, our main character Star, about it's not the hate you individually give, but the hate we together give, as in collectively. So Star puts her hands up and moves in front of her brother, pleading with the cops not to shoot, and also getting in the brother's way so he does not shoot as well. So the cops actually do listen this time and don't shoot. And King, afterwards, is brought into justice. And afterwards, Star's life comes together. She remains with her boyfriend, rejects her other friend Haley, notes no other association with her, and starts to talk about what her name means, and about lighting up future darkness, and how she will continue to fight the good fight. and that was The Hate U Give. I definitely thought that the best part of this movie definitely was the acting. It was extremely solid. Uh, there were definitely moments, as I mentioned very briefly before, particularly during that riot. And again, I say, even though this is not a horror movie, it created an uneasy tension. Uh, just the way that it was shot, everything they put together. Uh, this is definitely a very interesting movie. Definitely a very strong movie with a very strong message. And even though I do think that I, I do think this particular message, at least like in 2019 as we are now, I haven't seen anything particularly going on that revolves around these topics. So I'm not sure if it's like a topic that has died down, but this movie did come out in 2018, so I did want to point that out, even though I'm reviewing this in 2019. So there are definitely probably smaller things that are happening, maybe none that which I have heard of personally, but I have seen it in the news way before. So I do think that they needed that time gap of like let that part die down and make the movie. I think that was a very smart decision. As far as time being, considerate of everything that was going down, release the movie near the end of 2018, which is when most of that was dying down, at least from a news standpoint. That's what it looks like at the very most. So yeah, very wise, timeline wise, very well acted. A lot of good messages and morals. Definitely, using that voice, stepping up for what you believe in, being there for your family, essentially, because the Star stepping up for her brother, and so on and so forth, and deciding whether or not the people you want to hang around are who are your friends, and there's a lot of messages going on in this movie, some of which I probably couldn't even cover. I might have skipped something, but that is just the nature of this type of movie. There's a lot of morals that went into it, obviously. And I do think that, again, the acting is definitely what brings it to life. It definitely warrants paying attention to. So I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. And if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out that link in the description or head over to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.